Hey, welcome to the process. My name is Dr. John Bush. We're here trying to help you win your fantasy football drafts. That gives you a big shot to win that league. Uh, this is lesson 91, positional targets, part 8, wide receivers. And the next 3 lessons, we're going to be digging heavily into wide receivers, kind of looking at what's gone before at the team level, and then what are the estimated uh, targets for 2021, at least according to the public, kind of get their sense of what they think's happening, and then we can bounce our decisions off that. It's an example of reference class forecasting. Please go see that lesson if you get a chance. Let's start with wide receivers. We've already covered running backs and tight ends in the previous lessons. So this is the year we were looking at the wide receivers, year 2015, 16, 17, 19, and 20. And then I looked across the weeks, okay, and what you see is average targets of all wide receivers that got at least one target in the league that week. Just kind of a big landscape view of what's going on. Questions I always have, just in general, what's been going on recently? Is there anything going on early, middle, and late in a fantasy season by position that we need to know about so we can take advantage of? And let's begin. I did colorize all the data, and I think it's pretty clear. If you look at the green versus red being low and green versus high, that 2020 was a below average year, and 2019 wasn't so strong. 2018 and 17, the best years for wide receivers have really been 15 and 16, kind of as we look at the data here. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. One reason that could be is just the number of wide receivers getting in play in recent years is more. So the roughly same targets, but more mouths to feed. There's going to be less average. So that's probably what's going on. I think I may have hit that in some previous lessons here. I think there was some interesting data I found on numbers over the years here. But anyway, that's what we're seeing. And like I said, I had questions about the season as it went on, what was going on. And so what we have here is I plotted wide receiver target weekly averages versus 2015 and 20. And I really just emphasized 19 and 20. And even though I did have the previous year's data as well. So what I did was 2015 to 18, I just plotted those weekly averages as a small yellow circle. And then for 2019, I had a large red circle for the weekly average. And 2020, I did a large green circle. Okay. And then a large orange circle was the 6-year average here. So, and then I drew trend lines, polynomial trend lines for 19, 20, and the average. And if you look at the average over 6 years, okay, and I'm following it with my cursor here, pretty clear that 2020 and 19 pretty much have been below average, okay, if you look at that. As far as trends, it looks to me like both 2020 and 19, we saw kind of a lowering early in the season, maybe a little bit high, then it drops, and then it increases and drops again. So kind of a high, and then, but notice the 6-year average, we don't see as pronounced a drop till kind of during, of course, the playoffs here. And there is some evidence of some decreased activity during the weeks 14, 15, and 16. And we see kind of a peak 9, 10, 11. So that's kind of interesting, something to consider. That may be reflecting injuries, may be reflecting some teams have packed it in, may be reflecting that some teams are using quarterbacks that are not, they're trying some quarterbacks out because they know their season's done. So that can be skewing this data, but that looks like, if you follow the trend, it looks like there's a peak here. Let's call it let's see if I can draw here. How about that? So let's say, what, 8, and then 12, and then it looks like a decrease a little bit. And of course, looks like week 17 bumps back up when we don't need it. So that's kind of interesting as well. So looks like a peak, right? And kind of a valley here. So just be aware that there probably is seasonal patterns to the game. And if you play daily fantasy sports, playing there, FanDuel, DraftKings, etc., just be aware there may be some overall tendencies. And you're thinking, well, how come I hadn't heard about that? If I'm winning at daily fantasy sports, I'm not telling anybody, right? So I think there's a lot more research and results that are out there in various groups, databases, and they're using that, for their own plays. So just like in a lot of other gambling, there are syndicates that get together and do things. So I think you are playing against some of those players here, and they're not revealing things that they're finding. But I'm not a member of those, and don't play real heavily into daily fantasy sports. So not yet, anyway. I mean, I do have some research in that I haven't released, and may not release, may keep it to myself. But let's just say I know I've got some research. I suspect others do as well. So just keep that in the back of your mind. If you're going to get serious playing, you probably need to have some metrics, data scientist on speed dial to help you out. Okay. I also then wanted to look at variation. Variation, if it is high, means things are more uncertain than when variation is low. So is there a change in variation across the season? Just a question I have. And what about the average here? And if we, I changed the scale and whatnot, but if we look at the average here, we see this this valley right here that we've talked about, and the peak right there. And notice when we hit some polynomial, I tweaked it up a little bit. There is some early kind of peak, a drop, and then another little small peak, and then a drop big time again. And notice that the variation is really high mid-season and tends to drop. So the level of uncertainty when you're trying to make playoffs here is probably some of the highest. The good news is the uncertainty levels start going down by the time we get to the playoffs. Probably a lot of the uncertainty teams have with various schemes and wide receivers has pretty much settled out. The data would suggest it's starting to be settled out by week 10. So again, you probably won't hear that, but you get to hear it here. So there's some secret stuff. There are trends that are in the background that you're not even noticing here because it's just not something that is flashy. They'd rather say the sizzle. They could care less about the taste. And I'm pretty much a taste kind of guy. The hell with sizzle. And that's why I'm here on YouTube. My few people that listen to me, thank you, by the way, those few, versus some of these other hot dogs on the podcast and on TV and radio. I don't know who these people are. Everybody's an expert these days. Hell, I don't know. So variations dropping. I think it's starting to drop by week 10. So I think things are shaking out by about week 10. That's how I'm interpreting this data here. But things are still in flux. So I guess if I was trading, I think I would use the uncertainty. If I'm good at trading, maybe you're good at kind of dealing with this uncertainty, and you're trading at the right level when there's highest levels of uncertainty here. Just that's what I'm saying. And notice the averages for targets are high early and then dropping, so you might get some 1 or 2 week wonders early in the season and trade them away. People, you hear, now I do hear that, and I'm not sure they know why, but that is something that you will hear people talk about. And what I'm seeing, the metrics may support that activity versus just people's feelings. I feel like it's a good thing. Feelings don't put money in my pocket. So here is then, so I'm switching, looking, that was kind of across leagues. Now I'm breaking it to the team level. So I'm ratcheting down the lens a little bit to the team level. And I've got total of, or average of total targets across the 6 years. I've got the scaled targets. And what scaled means is it's relative to the league average. So when somebody says, oh, Pittsburgh had 62, that's high, but what does that mean? Well, if you look at the average, it's 12.9 across the time here, probably scaled average versus the league. So they've been the highest in the last 6 years, way above. And so that's 12x average. That's what that means. Wow. Detroit, Atlanta. People say, well, we're drafting Matt Ryan. Well, that's why is they have generated lots of targets. Notice Kyler Murray, Arizona. Notice the Rams are high. Okay. And notice the low, San Francisco. Philadelphia's had quarterback issues. Buffalo has had issues until probably the last year or so. So remember, some of this data is looking over 6 years, not looking at the last years. And I also look at average targets per game. So I break it per game. And that's actually how I sorted these teams. And I colorized the top, above average, below average, and the bottom or the worst by green, light red, and dark red. Okay, so if I'm drafting wide receivers from the bottom crew, just be aware that there's been a long-term lack of targets in some of those leagues. over 6 years. So, I mean, you know, fantasy is what you done for me lately, so we do need to be aware of that. I agree. And so I just plotted what I showed you just to kind of visually look at it. I give you visual because it's a lot better when you're storytelling to yourself to remember the image versus the numbers. The numbers kind of get lost. That's just who we are. I think there's some psychology of how we process numbers versus pictures. We're good at storytelling. We're good at putting two instances together and trying to call it a pattern. Okay. And that probably was good back, 10,000 years ago. It was good to know, hey, I killed the mastodon down the road there. So it's probably, I killed two this year. So probably I should go back and hunt again and get me a third mastodon for the family. Okay. So that our ancestors were ones who jumped to patterns, right? Probably quicker. So we are all part of that, and that's part. If you look at the psychology of trading and behavioral finance and some of those topics, there's really some interesting aspects of crowd behavior and why people do what they do, right? And that interests me as well. So I read that for fun, trying to figure that stuff out. Anyway, what we have here in the red is average of the total targets, uh, average of the scaled targets in yellow, above or below 0, and then the average of targets per game, and I sorted based on that. So the average targets per game, you see, it drops down, and probably about right here is about league average for targets per game. So teams in this direction have had more targets per game, and teams in this direction tend to have less. Tend over the last 6 years. Okay, and the yellow is interesting because you look at scaled here, and we can see some that are of interest here. Rams are of interest, Miami's of interest, Arizona's of interest. So figure out what's of interest, and notice San Francisco, Buffalo until recently, Tennessee, Washington have had trouble over 6 years. Okay, so it's just good to kind of see where things have been over 6 years. And then, since we are, what have you done for me lately? Let's look at 2019, 2020. So let's see what's happening, right? This is the church of what's happening now. And what I did was I calculated then the 2020 versus 2019 targets per game, and I hit that. It's called the difference. And I sorted based on the improvement from 19 to 20. And so teams in green have improved last year. So these were improving teams. These were declining teams. Okay. And you're saying, what about these others? Well, I like to look at the extremes. I feel a little bit more, I guess I should say, less uncertain about the extremes versus kind of close to the average. So I kind of push towards these teams and move away towards these, especially in wide receiver depth is probably what we're dealing with here. And I've covered this before in some other lessons here. But, teams that are doing a lot of activity probably have multiple receivers that are worth your time. Notice Pittsburgh. We probably got 3 receivers for 2021. Seattle's got 2. Cincinnati's got 2 or so. Kansas City's got a tight end and a wide receiver, right? Arizona's going to have a platoon full. Denver's 2 or 3. Jacksonville's had some. Dallas and then Miami, if all figure to have a lot more targets per game in 2021 than, say, New England, Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia, the Giants, Jets, San Francisco, Chargers, and Detroit. On average, again, we're looking still, it's data, but we can see the extremes here. New England's really the bottom. Boy, it'd be only in best ball would I dream of drafting receivers from New England. Only in best ball. And then I'm, drafted them way late if I'm drafting any. Okay. And so just take a look at the differences. I also have, I did 2020 differences versus the 6-year average. So I've just focused on 2020, the extreme. This is the most recent data we have, okay? And then I compared it to the 6-year. So who's up, who's down? And in purple are the up teams, right? Here they are. And yellow are the declining teams. Okay, so just if you're taking some of these teams, wide receivers from these yellow teams, just be aware that you're sitting in this trend from last year. Doesn't mean this is going to happen this year, but it's a good place to start your research. See, that's what I'm saying. You just can't, I don't believe any of this. Hey, you got to start somewhere, and that's what metrics allows you to do, is to start your research at a base. Reference class forecasting, that's it. It doesn't mean we're ending. This is not the end of our journey today. This is where I just use, to think about and consider all the other factors that I put in. Okay, but it's a good place to start. So there's this debate out there. Well, that was last year. Just etch or sketch it. I don't think New England's going to be at the top of this list for 2021. Okay, there's just some miracles that are just not going to happen. Okay, so to somehow throw that out and ignore that, you need to come play in my leagues. Okay, I'll share you a little bit of some of that excess cash you must have. Okay, so I hope people are not, basing their everything on feelings and their home teams. That's great. Let me get in the league of that. I'll just, the old Barracuda. I'll just come out there and reach and grab, snatch and grab, and take all their marbles. Okay, I like that. That's my kind of league. Okay, you're saying, well, you play against big professionals who are really good? No. Why should I? I'm here to make money. I don't care if you know who I am or not. In fact, I don't use my fantasy professor. I hide behind other names, and I don't talk in the chat room. You don't know who I am, and that's good. You don't need to know who I am. Okay, you don't need to know any of that. Okay, I'm here to make money. To me, that's my success. I don't care if I'm fame here. There's no fortune and a little bit of infamy in fantasy football. Just remember that. Okay. So here's the average targets per game, 19 versus 20. So this is the difference here. See, I plotted that with a blue circle, looking at the differences, the widely improving teams here. And so I labeled the 2020 versus much better than 2021 in targets per game. So these, were last seen at the site of the crime where they were producing more targets. Look at New England here. Are you kidding me? They're going to, you should forget about that. I'm not forgetting about that. And think about, so Atlanta, for instance. Well, what that means is that Matt Ryan just didn't produce enough targets. I mean, I agree. Julio's good. Calvin Ridley should have a great season. But I think they're not they didn't produce as many targets last year. Just be aware of that. You take a gamble when you invest high draft capital on teams that are out in this region. Doesn't mean I won't. I've drafted Calvin Ridley and Allen Robinson, right? I've done that, right? But just, if it comes back and bites me, I'm not just totally, wow, where did that come from? Well, there's something happening there from last year. And these are better in 2019 than 2020. So it's good to set your research mind here. Like I said, this is just the beginning. This is not the end. This is not gospel, but we have to start somewhere in our search, right? We just got to start somewhere. So that's the end of part one of the wide receivers. I preached a little bit, from the church of I love my metrics, but I have to use common sense as well. Sorry. If it was all numbers, everybody would do numbers. If it was all feelings, everybody would do feelings. In other words, since this is kind of a parimutuel kind of situation, whatever is working is, that's being selected for each year in fantasy football. So that's why some people, oh, I won with 0 running back, or I won with, 3 running backs, the first 3 picks. Just in a league where it happened, right? Look at, 10,000 leagues and then come tell me. I wish I had that data. That would be quite interesting, and I think revealing to a lot of people. Best we can do is study the ADPs and consider the potential patterns as a group. Okay, come back. We're doing the process. Another lesson's coming. This is extra, extra fun here.